Okay, assalamu alaikum everybody. Inshallah, this is a continuation of Surah Al Baqarah, and just a quick reminder of the context so far. This is a discussion happening in Medina, where the Prophet ﷺ has come to Medina. He has presented himself as a prophet. He's presented the verses of the Quran, and the people in Medina, some of the people in Medina, find this a threat. And the main people that find this a threat are the religious people. Those people who are religious authority before the Prophet ﷺ came. So the Christians and the Jews, especially the Jews, because they had power in Medina, and all the tribes, the pagan tribes, the polytheists, they used to look up to them because they believed that they were the people of the book and they were something special. So when the Prophet ﷺ came and the people started listening to the Prophet ﷺ, the Jews and the Bani Israel and the rabbis and the priests, they felt threatened. And first of all, they started accusing the Prophet of certain things. And then the Prophet ﷺ, through Surah Al Baqarah, the responses came that actually the Quran is inviting you to something that you already have in your books. Nothing new, but it's taking you back to the core. Some of the things that you are following have got mixed up with other things, with your own ideas. And so this is a kind of purification exercise to take you there. So next thing, so this discussion is happening, and we've read just before that the Quran reminds the Bani Israel of the covenant, of the promise that Allah made with them, which was to worship Allah, to be kind to your parents, to your neighbors, speak good to people, and so on. And then we'll come to the next section where they're debating with the Prophet ﷺ, and then they ask the Prophet ﷺ a question, and they said, which angel is it that supports you? So every messenger had an angel. Which angel is it? And if you answer correctly, then we will believe you, will follow you. So these verses are in this context where the discussion was about the angels. So which angel is supporting you, bringing the message, and so on. So I'm going to start off, we'll have a look at the first verse. I'll recite it in Arabic, look at the translation in English, and then we'll have a little discussion on these verses. So أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل من كان عدوا لجبريل فإنه نزله على قلبك بإذن الله مصدقا لما بين يديه وهدى وبشرى للمؤمنين. They say, whoever is an enemy to Jibreel, it is none but he who has brought the Quran down upon your heart, O Muhammad, by permission of Allah, confirming that which was before it, and as a guidance and good tidings for the believers. So as soon as the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that the angel that's supporting him is Jibreel, they said, he's our enemy. If you had said another angel, like Mikael, we would have believed you. But Jibreel is an enemy of ours, and it's in our books, it's written in our traditions. So how can you claim to be a messenger if your enemy is supporting you? How can we follow you? So we can't follow you. So this was a response to them. Says whoever is an enemy to Jibreel, and then Allah is reminding that it is Jibreel who brings the Quran down into your heart, the Prophet ﷺ's heart, by the permission of Allah, confirming that which went before. So he's telling the Bani Israel that actually Jibreel has come with the permission of Allah. He hasn't come by himself. So if you reject or say that you are the enemies of Jibreel, then in effect what you're saying is that you're enemies of God. Because Jibreel doesn't do anything of his own accord. He comes with the permission of God. And the second thing that this verse tells us is that whatever the angel Jibreel has brought confirms what is in your books already. So therefore you have no reason to reject this, because it's already agreeing with what you've got. And really, this is guidance for you, and you should be rejoicing. Bushra lil mu'mineen. If you were true believers, you would be rejoicing in this. You would be celebrating that God has sent the same message that came to us and has brought a message that's been purified from all the corruption that we've got. And the next verse says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Man kana aduwan lillahi wa malaikatihi wa rusulihi wa Jibreel wa Mikaala fa inna Allaha aduwwun lil kafirin. So whoever is an enemy to Allah and His angels and His messengers and Jibreel and Mikael, then indeed Allah is an enemy to the disbelievers. So let me give you a bit of background to these verses. So the context of this, there's a big debate going on now. And this is when the Prophet ﷺ left Makkah and came to Medina. The Jewish rabbis, they were very curious. Some of them were quite curious, and they came and surrounded the Prophet ﷺ, because in their scriptures they had signs that there was a Messiah going to come, a messenger was going to come. And in their books it said that it would be somewhere in this region. So therefore the Jews had left Jerusalem and they made their way all the way down into Arabia at that time. So when they heard about these reports that there's a man claiming to be a messenger of Allah, they all came. Even the chief rabbi Abdullah bin Salam, he was the most learned authority amongst the Jews, rabbi, the high priest, high rabbi. So chief rabbi, he came as well, and they all surrounded the Prophet ﷺ. Now in the Quran here, you'd notice that when we look at it, it says Jibreel, and when we say Jibreel. Okay, and the reason for that is in the Jibreel is not an Arabic name. It came from another language, probably the Hebrew language. It came from the language of the Bani Israel, and it's been put into Arabic. So the Arabs, whenever they used words that came from a different language, they were a bit sloppy with them. So in the Arabic language, there are 10 different ways, 10 lughat of how you pronounce Jibreel. Okay, so the one we got in the Quran is like this, Jibreel, and then in the Hadith and in the commentary is Jibreel. Okay, so they all mean the same thing, but there are 10 different variations, pronunciations that happen. So the next thing to ask is, why has Allah singled out the heart here? So if you look back at the verse, it says, فَإِنَّهُ نَزَّلَهُ عَلَىٰ قَلْبِكَ. Yeah, He's not bringing to you, not to your brain, but to your heart. And the reason for that is the word heart in Arabic and in the Quran is the seat of both your emotions and your reasoning. Okay, both. It's not just one thing or the other. So that's the core of your being, is your qalb. That's the core of your being. And you think with your heart as well, not just with your brain. If you just separate that, then you become a very cold person and you can't. So in the Quranic terminology, the word qalb includes both the heart and the mind as well. So Jibreel alayhi salam came and he revealed the core of the message into the heart of the Prophet, so into the core of his being. Okay, guidance. So this was guidance, and as I've just mentioned, instead of seeing it as guidance, they saw it from a very personal point of view. They felt threatened, they felt their authority, their position, their status was threatened. So rather than looking at the message and the guidance, they became angry and they became envious that how can somebody else take the message and take the authority of religion away from us? We are the guardians of religion. And this theme has been coming through. And so what does it mean when it says that they said Jibreel is our enemy, and then God says that God is the enemy of them as well? So what does the word enemy mean here, aduv? What does it mean when it applies to human beings, and what does it mean when it's applied to God? So when it's applied to human beings, aduv means where you go against the commands of God, you go against His guidance deliberately, on purpose, and you're defiant. So that's aduv. Because obviously you can't harm God in any way. So aduv means here that you're disobedient and you're defiant of God. So what does it mean if God takes you as an enemy? Now that's the second part. So it's فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ عَدُوٌّ لِلْكَافِرِينَ. So Allah is the enemy. So what does it mean when God takes somebody as an enemy? Okay. Now obviously in human terms we have different sorts of enemies and allies and so on. But when it refers to in the Quran, enemy here means that God takes His mercy away from them. So they will live lives that are wretched. They will live lives of misery. They will have no blessing in their lives. They will always be fighting and confusion and chaos in their societies. And that's what it means when Allah takes somebody as an enemy. And He takes them away from His forgiveness and His mercy. Okay, so those are when God takes you as an enemy, it's not like He's going to come and fight with you. That's not the meaning of the enemy here. It means that all His blessings will be taken away from you. Forgiveness will be taken away from you. And your life here on earth will be hell, because the mental anguish, the mental pain, the uncertainty that comes if you don't have a belief in God, all that will pain you. And many times in the Quran, the phrase is used, adabun alim. Okay, adabun alim. And alam means mental anguish and pain. Allah will give them a mental pain, a mental torture. And you can see people who don't have strong faith in God, they are always in a state of anxiety, always anxious, always worried. Because what gives you certainty and what gives you peace of mind is that there's a greater power than you controlling your affairs. If you just believe that you are in control on your own, you know your limits, you know how weak you are, and therefore you will suffer. So when God takes them as the enemies, you can see this. If you look at the history of those nations who have defied God, who have not followed His scripture and guidance, you will see they lived lives of misery. They had no honor in the world. Their societies were taken over by external elements. Allah sent other people against them, and you can see the history of that. You can see the history of the Bani Israel, the history of Judaism. You can see they were persecuted in every place that they went. And then in modern times, you can see, if you apply the same verses to the situation of the Muslims, when we've gone away from the core of the religion, we can see the state of our societies. We can see how much injustice, oppression, and in some cases they're like a living hell for people, for people who are living there. So that's what it means that God takes enemy. So let me give you a bit of background. So when the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, groups of rabbis, they surrounded him, And as Ibn Abbas narrates one incident where they all came and they said, we are going to ask you a question, or a couple of questions that only a messenger of God can answer. And that's our test. We're going to test you to see whether you really are the messenger of God. So we have a couple of questions from our scriptures, from our books, and we're going to ask you these questions. So they came as soon as the Prophet ﷺ came, and they surrounded him. So basically they wanted to show the public that this man won't be able to answer his questions. He's a fake, he's an imposter, he's a liar. So this was their strategy. They came as soon as the Prophet entered Medina. So they asked various questions. The Prophet ﷺ said, ask and I will answer you. And they asked various questions, and I'll give you an example of some of those questions later on. And then at the end, once the Prophet ﷺ answered all the questions, they said, okay, we have one more question. And this is the decider. Based upon the answer of this question, we will either follow you or we will go against you. This is the final question. And this is the question they asked, which angel is your wali? And wali in Arabic means your patron, your supporter, your helper. Who is your wali from the angels? So that was the question they asked. And the Prophet ﷺ said, Jibreel is my supporter. And every single messenger that came was supported by Jibreel alayhi salam. And they said, we will go our separate ways. You've given the wrong answer. Because Jibreel is our enemy. We can't accept it. And then these verses were revealed because of this incident. And then the Prophet ﷺ asked him, what is stopping you from accepting Jibreel? What is Jibreel? And he said, Jibreel is our enemy. Why is he the enemy? Because he brought the revelation that was supposed to come to us, to you. He's become our enemy. So it is interesting to notice the mentality, the psychology of people who believe it's their birthright to have religious authority. So it's not about the message, it's about them. And also they had certain traditions in their books which stated that Jibreel had gone against them in various incidents. And then I mentioned the chief rabbi, Abdullah bin Salam. He was the biggest authority amongst the Jews in Medina. And the Jews always looked up to him. Whatever he said, they would believe him. So when the Prophet ﷺ came to Medina, he dropped what he was doing, he ran, and he surrounded the Prophet ﷺ, and he also went to test the Prophet. And he asked, and he said to the Prophet, I want to ask you personally now 3 questions which only a messenger of God can answer. Nobody else can answer these questions. And these are the questions that he asked. He says the first question is, what is the first sign of the hour of the Day of Judgment? And when the Day of Judgment will start, or before the Day of Judgment, what is the first sign that the end of times is near? What is the first sign? And secondly, what is the first food that the people of paradise will eat? What is a very strange question, but that's the question he asked. What is the first food that the people of paradise will eat? And the third question, he says, what determines whether a child resembles the mother or the father? Okay, what determines whether a child takes on the features, looks like their mom or their dad? So the Prophet ﷺ replied, he said, Jibreel has come to me just now, presently, and he's informed me of the answers to your questions. And then Abdullah bin Salam, he said, Jibreel, well, he is our enemy. Yeah, he's come to you. So the rabbis didn't know which angel was bringing the message to the Prophet ﷺ. So they all said, he's our enemy. The Prophet ﷺ continued, he said, the first sign of the hour is a fire that will bring together the people from the east to the west. Okay, so this is the first answer to the first question. What is the first sign that the end of times has started? So the first sign of the hour is a fire that will bring together the people from the east to the west. Now that's quite interesting if you look at our times. There's been a huge migration. Because in the east, there's fire can mean war, can mean disaster, and there's been a flood in the last century of people leaving the east and coming to the west. And the second question, he said, what is the first meal? He said the first meal of the people of paradise will be the extra lobe of the liver, the kabid al-hut, of the fish liver. Okay, there's many interpretations of this, symbolic, but we won't go into those today. And so as for the last question, what determines whether a child looks like the mother or father? And he says it depends on if the man gets a discharge first, it will resemble the man, and if it's the woman, it's the woman. So the Prophet ﷺ answered these questions, and Abdullah bin Salam, he was the leader of the rabbis, but he had something special about him. And when he heard these answers, he accepted and he believed in the Prophet. But he didn't reveal, not in public. In private, he told the Prophet ﷺ that I'm going to believe in you. So the Prophet ﷺ said, don't do it in public yet. And there was a reason for that. Because when all the Jewish delegations came, the Prophet ﷺ asked them, who is it amongst your community you trust? Which person do you believe in? Yeah. And he said, Abdullah bin Salam, whatever he says, we will believe. And the Prophet says, Abdullah bin Salam has believed in me. And then they say, oh no, he's a bad man, and so on, and they rejected. So this was the occasion of revelation of these verses, how these verses were revealed. Okay, so let's think about some of the lessons from these verses. They made a separation between the angels and God. And that's very important. You don't take religion in little bits. So we're going to accept this part of religion, we're going to reject that part. You have to accept all of it. So you can't separate Allah from His angels, because that implies that the angels have their own agency, they have their own authority, and they can decide what they can do. Whereas actually the only authority belongs to God alone. And the second thing is they took themselves as the benchmark of right and wrong. Rather than looking at the guidance that was coming to them, they said, no, if it doesn't agree with us, who we are, then we're going to reject it. And this is a really important principle. Sometimes we think, okay, because we're Muslims, in the way we define it, if somebody else comes along and defines something else for us in a different way, rather than looking at the points, the arguments, the reasons behind it, we reject it because it doesn't come from us. And that's a really dangerous thing. So what these verses are teaching us is we need to have a benchmark irrespective of tribe you belong to, or the family you belong to, or the sect or the group that you belong to. Those things are irrelevant. You have a clear criteria, and then you should be willing to give your own personal views up, your own personal interpretations up, once it's clear that a clear message has come and the benchmark, the clear benchmark has been met. So those criteria have been met. And then you have to accept that divine distribution. You can't say, okay, right, good, and can only come to me, can't come to anybody else. So here, one of the main reasons for their rejection was that they felt they were the gatekeepers of religion, that only they could have the authority of religion. So they felt, well, it's unfair. Why has God chosen somebody else, somebody from unlettered people who can't read or write? Why has God chosen somebody from them? So this is very important. We shouldn't become envious if we see other people with blessings. This is the distribution of God, and we should accept it. Now, for a little note there, God's distribution isn't random. He doesn't say, okay, right, I'm going to give blessings to you. Oh, I'm going to harm you. There's a whole mechanism in place. And these are based upon principles, spiritual principles that God has told us in the Quran. So if you, for example, if you have God consciousness, if you're mindful of God, you will see blessings in your life. If you're committing injustice, you're taking the rights of other people away, you will see unhappiness and negative aspects in your life. So it's not random. So the reason why those rabbis weren't chosen, because they had lost those core principles of religion. They had lost humility. They had lost objectivity. It was all about them and their political influence and their authority. So therefore, they weren't ready. So it wasn't a random choice. Sometimes in the Quran, you'll come across a phrase where it says, يُعَذِّبُ مَنْ يَشَاءُ وَيَغْفِرُ لِمَنْ يَشَاءُ. He punishes whom He wills, and He benefits or forgives whom He wills. It's not random. It's based upon the criteria that God has set for Himself. And we should rejoice and celebrate the message of God, and not let our own feelings, our own interpretations sway our thinking in the face of clear signs. So if somebody presents to you a very clear argument that's backed up by evidence, then you shouldn't let your own personal views come in the way. And that's the sign that you are honest and truthful, because you're willing to give your own deeply held views if it is proven that actually you were mistaken. And that is a very important feature, characteristic that we've lost. We've all become very much sectarian, the group we belong to. We just take that and we reject everybody else's ideas. Okay, moving on to the next verse. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. وَلَقَدْ أَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ آيَاتٍ بَيِّنَاتٍ وَمَا يَكْفُرُ بِهَا إِلَّا الْفَاسِقُونَ. So God tells us, we've given you clear signs now. Whatever you have brought to all the people in Medina are clear signs. Absolutely clear. Ayatim mubayyinat. Clear signs. So if they reject now, there is no reason they can reject. Only those people who are the fasiqun will reject. And there's a very important principle here, that God's guidance can't benefit the fasiqun. And who are the fasiqun? Those people who deliberately are disobedient. They know what is true, then choose not to follow it. Okay, you deliberately go against what is accepted. You deliberately go against what is established as correct and right, and openly defiant and disobedient. And because that shows arrogance. You can't be a believer if you've got even an ounce of pride inside you. You have to have that humility. And if you're not willing to accept your signs because of your own wishes, then you will come into the category of fasiqun. Now what's interesting is that this category of fasiqun isn't linked with Muslims, non-Muslims, Jews, Christians. Even Muslims can be fasiqun as well. And there are verses in the Quran which refer to certain action that refer as fasiqun, and it is referring to Muslims as well. So this is a characteristic, a mental state of mind, that if you're defiant, and defiance motivated by anger, motivated by envy, motivated by jealousy, that's the kind of defiance we're talking about, where you know this is the truth, but I'm not going to follow it because I don't like it, or it affects my status. I've got long reasons for not following it. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. أَوَكُلَّمَا عَاهَدُوا أَحْدًا نَبَذَهُ فَرِيقٌ مِّنْهُمْ بَلْ أَكْثَرُهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ وَلَمَّا جَاءَهُمْ رَسُولٌ مِّنْ عِندِ اللَّهِ مصدق لما معهم نبذ فريق من الذين أوتوا الكتاب كتاب الله وراء ظهورهم كأنهم لا يعلمون. So the verses continue that every time God makes a promise or a covenant with a group of people, they throw it away. So is it not true that every time they took a covenant, a party, they'll throw it away? But in fact, most of them do not believe. Now what is interesting is that if you asked the rabbis and all the religious people, they would regard themselves as the foremost believers, the first believers, the only believers. Because they are looking at the outward of religion. They are looking at, okay, we're doing all the rituals of religion, we read all the books, we write commentaries on the books. People look at us and say, we're religious people. And we're believers. But this verse is telling us actually, God isn't interested in that. What He's interested in is, have you kept your covenant? Your promise that you're going to worship Him alone. You're going to look after the weak, the vulnerable people in your society. You're going to speak nicely to people, not abuse and harm each other. The orphans, the widows, you're going to look after them. All the covenant that was mentioned earlier. They broke that covenant. Doesn't matter how religious you are, if you break those core values and core agreements with God, you're not a believer. Irrespective of the outward religious elements that you have. You may look the part completely, but if you haven't got those core values and your religion isn't benefiting society, isn't taking away hardship from people, isn't making the life of other people better, looking after the vulnerable people in society, then you're not believers. So says Allah saying majority of them are not believers. And whenever a messenger comes to them from Allah, confirming that which was with them, a party of those who had been given the scripture, through the scripture of Allah behind their backs, as if they did not know. So when somebody comes to you and says, okay, this is the truth, this is the objective truth, I'm not saying it for my own self, and even though it confirms, you know, okay, these are the core principles, and it confirms with what the criteria of truth that you have, and they still reject it, they threw it away, a group of people threw it away. And here it says, threw it behind their backs. This is an adha, wara' al-dhuhurihim. This is an idiom in Arabic, which means that they completely ignored the contents of the book and just diverted and engrossed themselves in other things. And later on, we're going to talk about what those things were they engrossed themselves in. And in our tradition, those of you who speak Punjabi and Urdu, we have this concept of gand. Okay? That's the literal meaning of this. Okay? It doesn't literally mean behind the back. It doesn't mean they took the Torah and put it behind the back. What it meant is they ignored it completely. Okay? But in our tradition, it's become something, a very literal thing, oh, don't put it behind your back, which is still a good sign, showing respect and so on. But in essence, we have thrown the book behind our backs because we aren't following the content of the book. And if you look at our traditions, mainly we go to commentaries, or so-and-so sheikh said this, so-and-so person said this, so-and-so scholar said this. But what did God say? And we ignore all of that. And so really, in true terms, the Quran isn't a living book for us anymore. It is hidden away. It doesn't govern our daily lives. It doesn't govern our decisions, our societies. So we, in practice, have done exactly what the Bani Israel or the Jews did to their book. We have thrown it behind our back. It doesn't govern our daily life. And the last phrase is interesting. كَأَنَّهُمْ لَا يَعْلَمُونَ. So these people knew, and despite this knowing, God is saying they didn't know. Okay, as though, so they have the knowledge, and yet, when you look at them, and you look at their actions, it seems as though